Welcome, friends, back to Doable Discipleship, a Saddleback Church podcast designed to help you grow closer to God, deepen your friendship with God.
It wasn't perfect, but
I know.
You did a pretty good job.
I got the chance to do the intro. And
just asked you, do you have the intro? You feel good?
Stuck the landing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're a
give it a
show
B.
designed to help you deepen your friendship with God. There we go. So we are in part 4 this week of our series.
Yep.
Talking about the relationship principles of God using Pastor Tom's book. Holla.
Wow, you're the first person to use that since 2009.
Week 1, nothing. So in our first week on this, we talked about nothing is more important than relationships. Week 2, love as Jesus loves you. That was action-oriented, talking about how love is patient, love is kind, love is not proud, love is not selfish, and don't give up.
Love perseveres.
Yeah. Yeah. And then week 3, last week, we talked about communicate from your heart. So we talked all about the power of words and how words stem from your heart and how words can affect your heart.
Absolutely.
So this week, we are talking about as you judge, you will be judged.
Yeah. Let's dig into that theme verse. It goes like this. Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5. It says, "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, 'Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye,' when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite! First get rid of the log in your own eye, and then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." Now, this is among the most misunderstood and misinterpreted passages.
In the most misapplied.
Yes.
Yeah.
Completely. This one is just wrecked all the time. People just don't know how to handle this passage. And I love that Pastor Tom speaks to this in the book. And we're going to be digging into that a little bit today. You want to talk to us about what Jesus really meant?
So you've heard this passage before, I'm sure. I'm sure you've heard the saying before about the speck in your eye, or a speck in the friend's eye, a log in your own. And you've maybe thought, what did Jesus mean? Well, that's what we're hitting on right now.
What did Jesus expressed it that boisterously?
What did Jesus mean?
What is up with that?
Yeah, it makes me think of Seinfeld, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so we're on page 197 in Pastor Tom's book. There's a great quote that's going to be a big chunk of what we're talking about today. Pastor Tom says, "If these words of Jesus are going to have any impact on our lives, we must reject the attractive yet cowardly and false interpretation of what he is saying. The cowardly approach to being non-judgmental says, 'You live your life and I'll live mine. I won't say anything about your life and you won't say anything about mine.' Sounds good, doesn't it? We'd all like to avoid the unpleasantness of confronting problems in a relationship or in a friend's life. Even more, we don't like it when others confront the things we don't want to change in our own lives. Not being judgmental doesn't mean you can't be discerning, nor does it mean you can't say it is right to do one thing and wrong to do another. If this were so, it would be ridiculous for Jesus to tell us to not judge, because that statement would itself be judgmental."
Yeah.
So what we're getting at here, Jesus is not commanding us to ignore the wrongdoings of others.
Yeah.
And so many people, I think, apply this passage and say, that means that you mind your own business, kind of thing.
Right.
But again, Jesus is not saying to ignore wrongdoing. He's not saying to not make a judgment in your head of something that is right or wrong.
Yeah. It doesn't mean throw out your entire concept of morality and what's right and what's wrong. It doesn't mean that you ignore the teachings of the Bible on this, that, or the other issue. It means something completely different from that, which we're going to dig into. One thing we can be sure of, though, is that Jesus is not telling us that it's okay to turn a blind eye to evil or to wrongdoing, things that are being done that are simply not right. Christians are commanded to support and to uphold what's right, but they're also commanded to oppose what is wrong. We know that that's just a part of the Christian life, upholding what's good and opposing what's wrong. Protesting evil is a really important duty or job for every believer. Jesus himself did that. He upheld God's moral law when he lived. And that sometimes meant that he had to push back on the behavior or the attitudes of other people. And we actually know from the New Testament writings, Paul reinforces this a lot, and all the apostles reinforce the idea that we have an especially important responsibility as believers to help keep fellow believers accountable. So we are meant to look out for each other. We are meant to push back on each other when we're straying down dangerous lines of thought or starting to dabble in dangerous behaviors or that kind of stuff. We are meant to look out for each other. We can't abdicate that role.
Yeah, there is right and wrong in this world.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, the people who use this passage are basically saying, well, what you think is right or wrong is different from what I think is right or wrong.
Right.
So, don't judge me because of your belief in what's right and wrong versus mine.
Right.
But what we're told is that there is right or wrong, and it's in the Bible. It's what Jesus teaches. And so we're supposed to make a call, say like, hey, actually that's wrong,
right,
in the eyes of the Lord.
Right. Yeah, Tom has a great quote. It's on page 221. It says, "The alternative to judgment is not tolerance, it is mercy." So he's saying that the opposite of judgment is not to just say that everything's okay, there's no such thing as what's right or what's wrong, just whatever, it's a free-for-all, but rather to show mercy. We'll talk more about the mercy idea as we get further along. But this is an important distinction. I think it's very insightful on his part.
Oh, it's a huge point. And so what we're talking about is Jesus is commanding us to do three things out of this passage, right? First is don't be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
So don't say one thing and do another, right? So how can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Yeah. What he's talking about is don't make others rise to a standard that you yourself don't meet. It's and that's kind of the heart behind this is thinking that you are, on a different plane than another person or whatever, and saying that, oh, like I'm okay, but hey, I've seen that thing, but so in not being a hypocrite, it's recognizing, hey, I'm not perfect either, but let's talk about this, together. And and you brought up the point earlier about accountability, and so that's a huge avenue to have like accountability partners or mentors or people that you let speak into your life. Is being open to hearing from others and then you being open to talk to them too.
Jesus, this hypocrisy idea is kind of what this whole passage revolves around. Jesus does not say in this passage, I mean, if we look back at the passage, he doesn't say don't judge others or be judicious toward others. What he's saying is first get rid of the log in your eye and then you'll see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. So he's saying there's just a sequence to this. It's not as though we cannot address what's wrong in each other's lives. That is a partnership between people and between believers especially. Totally. We're not told that it's okay to just forget about that. He's saying, just don't do that before you make sure you assess yourself first. It has to begin with you. And I think what Jesus is really saying here about judging others is that it's one thing to judge behaviors, but sometimes we jump to the conclusion of judging the human being and judging the motives of the heart. And we then go beyond what we're capable of and what we're actually asked to do, because we know that only the Lord can see the heart. So we sometimes jump to conclusions about people, and that's the level of judgment that Christians should not stray into. But when it comes to just someone doing something that's destructive to themselves or that is just plain wrong, there's a responsibility for believers to step up.
Yeah, and recognizing that you do things that are wrong. Like I think it's not being so proud to think, oh, I am sinless. So, and just going around pointing out other people's, it's saying, hey, I mess up too. I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're going to see that one come up even more in a couple points from now. But the second one I want to talk about is so first we said, don't be a hypocrite. Second is live with integrity. This is what Jesus is commanding us to do, which of course, integrity just means that you judge yourself first, and that you're willing to change before you demand change from somebody else. Integrity is the opposite of hypocrisy. So integrity means that you are the same throughout. externally and internally, that you're consistent across. Whereas hypocrisy says, I am one thing on the surface and something else underneath. And this is what Jesus is speaking out against. Again, like we talked about last week, Jesus is focused on the content and the condition of people's hearts. And this is where the hypocrisy thing comes in, where you can have a polished exterior and a filthy or evil interior. Integrity means you bring those two things into alignment.
Yeah.
So you can actually have integrity by being just as bad on the outside as you are on the inside. That's integrity in a sense, because it's equality, or it's a cohesiveness between what's on the outside and what's on the inside. So integrity is just meaning we're the same throughout. So judge yourself first, and first take that humble posture of assessing yourself before you decide or presume to know what others should do, or make some claim on someone else's life and behavior.
Yeah. And then the third command that Jesus has told us to do is to show mercy to everyone. Give others the same understanding, grace, and forgiveness that God has given to you. Right? And this one is is especially important for longtime Christians, because it can be so easy to get to this point where it's just, where you take it for granted almost, just how much God has forgiven you and continues to forgive you. Like every day you mess up in some way.
Yeah,
I know I do, but I know if you've been a Christian for a long time, it can be easy to just not think about that kind of stuff. Instead, all you see are the sins of others.
Yeah.
And then you just you don't think about God's grace and God's mercy, and you get to a place where you just immediately pass judgment on others.
Yeah.
And what this is saying is if you're going to live with integrity, which is what we just talked about, is you have to be able to, admit, I mess up. I still mess up. I've been a Christian for so many years, and I still mess up every day. I still need and rely on God's mercy and God's grace and His faithfulness and His forgiveness and all of the attributes of God that we talked about in previous episodes. And when we change our focus and fix our eyes on what God has done for us, then that will naturally flow into how we relate to other people.
Yeah.
I think that's, if we take our eyes off of God and we just focus on the world and what we see around us, then you're only going to see, things a certain way. But when you focus on God, how He relates to you is going to be, is going to influence greatly how you relate to others.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're talking about how we've got to remember how much God has forgiven us, I think one problem that we have if we've been believers for a long time is that we kind of lose touch with our flaws over time, and we tend to become desensitized to our own sins and our own imperfections.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, when there's like something smelly in your house and you lose your ability to smell it, And I think for some of us Christians, we may calcify over time, and we lose our ability to really notice the things that are wrong in our hearts. And that's the Pharisaic attitude, where you just begin to look at yourself as being just fine and perfect, and everybody else seems like, dirtbags by comparison. And that's a big problem. It's a really ugly place for a Christian's heart to get into. And it's a problem of memory, where we forget that God has forgiven us for a lot. And we also forget to respect other people on their stage of development.
Yeah.
Like I think Christians will sometimes judge people who aren't Christians as if they were. They measure them by the wrong standard, and therefore they falsely, or I think inappropriately, expect people who aren't Christians to behave Christianly.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that without Christ, that people are lost, and so we can't expect people to behave according to our moral standard, and I shouldn't say our moral standard, but by God's moral standard, if they're in a broken relationship with Him still. That's never. So we ought to show a lot of grace toward people like that, because we don't know what their internal life is quite like, and we don't know what journey they're on. Only God can see that stuff. But also, when we look at fellow believers, like it's easy for a more mature or older believer to look at a younger believer and be like, what's this young punk doing, doing this or that. But I think we have to remember, when I was at that stage of development or when I was at that age, I did a lot of foolish things too. And I need to be able to back up and have some perspective on where other people are. And I think this command not to judge, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is rooted in our judgment of we can't make the leap from judging the external to using the external to judge the internal.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that's where we've talked on the show before about the wretched machine idea.
Yeah.
Like C.S. Lewis says, this is why we're not to judge, because we don't know what the internal life is for other people. You may see somebody who seems like they got it all wrong, but you don't know what they're up against. You don't know you may not know what their internal life is. You may not know what kind of temptation they're under. You may not know the kind of it could even go as far as demonic oppression somebody could be under. It could be the way they grew up, all the stuff they've been through. There's just people are so complicated, and we have a tendency to make people one-dimensional, simplify them down, and just pass judgment, right? And just slap a label on people. But Jesus reminds us that there is a lot going on there, and that we need to show mercy, which is what we're going to be moving into next.
Yeah. When in doubt, talk with the person.
Yeah.
Just have a conversation and say, hey, I was just wondering about this, because you don't want to rush to judgment either. Like, you don't want to, assume something worse than it really is.
Yeah.
And you don't want to, make something up. And you certainly then don't want to lead to gossip about it,
Mm-hmm.
About something that you may have misunderstood.
Yeah.
So if we're in this series is on relationships, probably the most relational thing that you can do in regarding this a topic of judgment is to talk with the other person about it, and just
gain some perspective.
Yeah, and just be open about it, and say, just say, I don't know, I'm just curious. Just want to ask you about this,
and try to get at the truth rather than making assumptions in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah, I heard a speaker at a camp one time actually talk about this passage, and I thought what he said was really smart, because he kind of split his words carefully. And what he was telling, this was actually to students, he was speaking to high school students. He said, be judicious, but don't be judgmental. And those are two different things. So being judicious means you operate with wisdom, and you see things as they really are and react appropriately to things as they are. Whereas being judgmental is when you jump to conclusions. You conclude things that can't necessarily be concluded from what you see on the exterior. And so I thought that was an interesting break. Jesus is not saying don't be judicious or be foolhardy and just not care, but at the same time, don't jump to conclusions that aren't appropriate for real circumstances.
Yeah, and again, what we're talking about is healthy relationships, and having so keeping that at the forefront of wanting to put value and impact in these relationships that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to just write somebody off or attach a label to to a person.
Yeah.
Instead, it's trying to invest in that relationship. And
yeah, that's good. All right, you want to take us into number 3?
We were already there.
Oh, were we?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My bad. So yes, show mercy to everyone, live with integrity, and don't be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Colossians 3:12 through 14. This is a really important passage, and it's from this passage that we're going to pull all the doables for this episode, which we'll get to in just a moment. It says, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, speaking to believers, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. So from that, let's talk some doables. Not first, but we're going to get through a list of things here coming from Colossians chapter 3. But I want you to stop first and foremost and just reflect. Is there someone in your life who's been hurt by your judgmental attitude, who you've been just passing judgment on, been maybe making them feel crummy for the things that they're doing or the way that they're thinking about things. This can happen really easily, parents toward kids. So maybe it's with kids, maybe it's with some extended family member that you have a strained relationship with. But who's been hurt by your judgmental attitude, by your lack of mercy, your lack of tenderness? Let's this week decide to infuse that relationship with a little bit of these things which are outlined in Colossians 3:12 through 14. How about a little bit of mercy? Just show them some mercy. Remember that God has forgiven you. Show them some kindness. So apply some kindness to that relationship. Some humility. So recognizing that you're imperfect, recognizing that that you're not necessarily better off than they are. With gentleness, with patience. Gentleness, by the way, going back to that one, is go back to the communication episode for that, because this is all about tact and how to approach things. You might be making a good point, but be doing it in the wrong way. That doesn't actually promote unity or reconciliation. Patience, of course, and forgiveness. So mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, and forgiveness. A little bit of that can go a really, really, really long way.
When in doubt, just try a little tenderness.
Yeah, tenderness, incidentally, was not on the list.
Well, it's kind of like gentleness.
Yeah, you're right.
We'll go with that.
I'll give you that.
Again, like I hope our heart for this is coming across, and our heart for healthy relationships.
Yeah.
And thinking about everything that we've been talking about through the lens of these relationship principles of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's our heart.
Yeah. Guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again next week with another relationship principle of Jesus. We'll see you next time. If you're a podcast listener and you enjoyed this episode, consider giving us a rating or a review on iTunes. If you do, you'll help other people find us in the future. And if you're thinking, hey, listening's great, but is there a way I can watch these episodes? Yeah, there is. Subscribe to the Saddleback Church YouTube channel for video versions of these conversations, plus lots of other video content. And if you're already watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast so you can listen in the car or wherever else you go. Lastly, you can always get in touch with us by emailing maturity@saddleback.com. Send us your thoughts, send us your questions, your Bible questions, your life questions, whatever. Who knows? Your question just might inspire an upcoming episode. Thanks again for tuning into Doable Discipleship. I'm Doug Jones, and I hope you'll join us again next week.